Moses, and I want to talk about Moses' sin tonight. You know, Moses wasn't allowed into the promised land because of his sin at Meribah. And that's kind of one of those things we look at and maybe don't really understand. This evening I want us to look at that a little bit deeper than maybe you've looked at it before, possibly. Hold on if I can go here. There we are. It's in Numbers 20, 8 through 12. Take the rod, you and your brother Aaron, assemble the congregation, and speak to the rock before their eyes, that it may yield its water. You shall thus bring forth water for them out of the rock, and let the congregation of their beasts drink. So Moses took the rod from before the Lord, just as he had commanded him. And Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly before the rock. And he said to them, Listen now, you rebels. Shall we bring forth water for you out of this rock? Then Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod, and water came forth abundantly, and the congregation and their beasts drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, Because you have not believed me to treat me as holy in the sight of the sons of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them. Now, I've heard a lot of sermons over this, or not a lot, but several over the years. I've read a lot of commentaries about this. There's a lot of thoughts, what was Moses' sin? Was it not saying that God brings it forth? Shall we bring it forth? Was it striking the rock when God said to talk to the rock? Was it a lot of different things? But I think if we look at this a little deeper, it might make a little bit more sense to you. You have to look at the pattern of God and Moses to really understand what's going on. The pattern of God and Moses is pretty set in the Bible. Israel would sin. Israel would transgress God. They would, like in the case of the golden calf, they went, and Moses went on the mountain and they made the golden calf. And God said, I'm going to destroy you. I've had it with you people. I'm done with you. I'm going to destroy you. I'm going to raise up somebody for Moses to lead. And I'm going to make a great nation out of you, Moses. But this people, Israel, I'm finished. And Moses goes before God. And he says, God, don't do it. God, spare Israel. This is Rex's paraphrase. God, spare Israel, right? Otherwise, the nations around us are going to say you're not a promise-keeping God and you didn't do what you were supposed to do. And, go with us, and the people are going to humble themselves. Don't desert us. And God relents, and God says, okay, I'm going to go with you, and I'm going to show you my glory. And we talked about that last Sunday night in the dark. He says, I'm going to show you my glory, right? And I'm going to relent. And then, once again, they got to the promised land. They wouldn't go in. And God said, I've had it with you people. I'm done with you. I'm going to destroy you. You won't do what I say to do. You won't believe that I can deliver you. You don't have faith in me. I'm done with you. I'm going to destroy you. I'm done with you. And Moses comes before God and says, oh, God, don't do it. Spare them. Otherwise, what will the nations around us think? That you're not a promise-keeping God and you don't do what you do. And God relents. And God says, all right, you can wander in the desert for 40 years, but I'll bring you back, and you'll be able to go into the promised land. And then in number 16, the Rebellion of Korah, which is not something we spend a lot of time on, and we probably should. The Rebellion of Korah, God does the same thing. Korah rebels, says, why can only Aaron be the high priest? We can do this. And so God more or less throws down the challenge, and says, all right, show up. We'll let God choose. And God swallows them up. The earth swallows them up. And God says, I'm done with you people. I'm going to destroy all you people. I've had enough. And Moses once again intercedes. Aaron makes a sacrifice. God sends a plague. And if you read that story, Aaron takes a pan and stands between the dead and the living and stops the plague. And God relents. So once again, there's a pattern in this. Israel sins. Moses intervenes. That's the story of Israel in the wilderness. But not so at the rock of Meribah. Not so. God just says, go do it. I'll give them water. These people are angry. These people want water. Just show up. Go ahead and give them water. No, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to destroy you. Why don't you believe me? Why? What changed? Why did God change the pattern? Why did he not do the same thing that he has always done? It was really late. I know it seems like it wasn't if you read the text, but if you really look at it with the death of Aaron and the death of Miriam, this was like the 38th year of Israel's wandering in the desert. So 38 years now. Moses had put up with these people, right? They're grumbling, they're complaining, they're bickering for 38 years. Long period of time. Moses was not the same man that led Israel out of Egypt. He wasn't. He had changed. Moses had changed. And I think any of us would. It had been a lot of years. He'd put up with a lot. He had led this people. He'd put up with their grumbling, their complaining. He had stood as a judge before them for 38 years. He had had to deal with all their things. He had changed. I think God knew that. God knew Moses wasn't the same Moses that led the people out of Israel. You know, I used to think when I was young, and I'd see old people and they'd get bitter and angry, and I would think, I'm never going to be like that. And now that I'm getting older, sometimes I catch myself being bitter and angry, you know? So don't say that you won't, because you do, because life has a way of beating on you, you know? Whether or not you want it to, it just does. And you have to consciously decide you're not going to be that way, because if you go the way of the world, by the time you've lived enough years on this planet, you're going to be kind of bitter and angry. I mean, it's just fact of life, you know? And Moses had spent a lot of years on this earth. Let's face it, Moses was almost 120 years old by this point in his life. But if you look at what happens here, it's really interesting, because Moses recounts this in Deuteronomy as Moses is chastising them to enter the promised land, and Moses is recapping the history of Israel and the journey of the wandering. And in Deuteronomy 127, if you look, he says, you're grumbling in your tents and said, because the Lord hates us, he has brought us out of the land of Egypt, delivers the hand of the Amorites to destroy us. He starts to put it, that's not the right verse. He starts to put it on Israel. Must have been 26. He starts to put it on Israel. He says, you did it because Israel. Because you know, God won't let me go in because of you. If you look at Deuteronomy 3, he says, I also pleaded with the Lord at that time, saying, O Lord God, you have begun to show your servant greatness, your strong hand. He says in 25, let me, I pray, cross over and see the fair lands beyond the Jordan, the hill country in Lebanon. But the Lord was angry with me on your account. It's interesting. Moses starts to blame. He blames the Lord being angry with him on Israel. It's you people. You're the ones who did it. Now God said, Moses, you're the one who sinned. But Moses says, it's your all's fault. You caused me to get to here. You've done it. In the verse before, if I'd got the right verse, I think it's 26, he basically says the same thing. Israel caused me to sin. If you look at Deuteronomy 4, he says, the Lord was angry with me on your account and swore that I would not cross the Jordan, that I would not enter the good land which the Lord our God is giving you as an inheritance. For I will die in this land. I shall not cross the Jordan, but you shall cross and take possession of the good land. Once again, Moses says what? He says, you people did it. You did it. It's on your account. That's kind of interesting, isn't it, when you think about it? Why did Moses say that? Why did he say it's because of you? Because Moses wasn't the same man that led the children of Israel out of Egypt. He had changed. 40 years, 38 years had beat him down. He'd had enough of them. He was done with them. So in Numbers, if you go back to that, just ahead of that, he says, there was no water for the congregation. They assembled themselves against Moses and Aaron. The people thus contended with Moses and spoke, saying, if only we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. They're talking about the rebellion of Korah, 30-some years before this account. They're saying if we had died 30-something years ago, that's what they're talking about, and that was early on. If we had died 30-something years ago, we should have just died with them. And listen to what they tell Moses. Why have you brought the Lord's assembly into this wilderness for us and our beasts to die here? They didn't say, why has God led us? Did they? They said, why have you led us, Moses? What's wrong with you? Why have you done it? 38 years he listened to this, right? Why did you do it? He's almost 100, he's 118 years old, right? You know? He's thinking, I've had enough of this. I've had enough of you. I've had enough of this. Right? Can you kind of see it going on here a little bit? He says, why have you made us come up from Egypt? Not God. Why have you done it? to bring us in this wretched place. It is not a place of grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, nor is there water to drink. Well, I think that was just the straw that broke the camel's back with Moses. I do. I think he just had all these people that he wanted. And I think that's how come he says, you caused me to sin. You broke me down. You broke me. You're bickering and you're complaining and your lack of faith in God. You broke me. I didn't break myself, but you broke me. And I think that's why he blames Israel for what was going on. You know, the truth is that when, and if you go back to, Numbers 11, 14, Moses takes him to the same rock, Meribah, and strikes the rock to bring forth water. Just because God says take it and speak to it, I don't know, striking the rock was the big thing. He said, do you want us to bring forth water? But that's not really the problem either, in my opinion. So what is the problem? What's going on? What's going on? Listen to how Moses speaks to them. I'm going to read this passage again now that you know all this background. Moses and Aaron gathered. Listen now, you rebels. You see, if you look at the pattern of it, God got mad at Israel. Moses stood up for Israel, and God relented. Was God ever really going to destroy Israel? No, he wasn't ever going to do it. He knew exactly what he was going to do. God didn't threaten to destroy Israel because he wanted to destroy Israel. God threatened to destroy Israel because he wanted Moses to intercede. He wanted Moses to step up. He wanted Moses to stand between God and Israel and say, I'm sticking up for you. But then all of a sudden, when he gets to this point, God doesn't get mad at Israel. So what's the test? Is the test Israel or is the test Moses? God didn't stand up. God just said, give them water. They're bickering, they're complaining. I don't really care. God never said that before. Whenever they did that before, God said, I'm going to destroy them, right? But this time, God said, I don't care. Just give them water. Easy, easy peasy, right? No problem, no complaining. Just give them water. But Moses had enough, hadn't he? And he walked up to him and he says, you rebels, shall we bring forth water for you out of this rock? Question. Shall we bring it forth? You see, Moses' heart had changed, hadn't it? He was not the same guy that came out of Egypt. He's done. You ever been that way in your life? I've been there a few times. He was done, right? And he said, I've had enough of you. And God said, Moses, you failed me. Because guess what? You didn't hold me holy. You didn't hold me holy in your heart. See, the sin of Moses was not the action, nor was it the words. The sin of Moses was in his heart. He no longer regarded God as the salvation of Israel, and he no longer regarded Israel, and this is probably the biggest thing, he no longer regarded Israel, who God had chosen to enter the promised land. He no longer regarded Israel as worthy to be saved. He said, we're done. You see, sin always is in the heart. And it's the same way sometimes with us in the parallel. There's people in our lives sometimes that drive us nuts. There's people in our lives that we give up on, right? Have you ever given up on anybody? I certainly have. There's people in our lives that we give up on them. They're either in addiction, they're a problem, they're a complainer, they're whatever they are. It's always something. You ever have people like that in your lives? It's always something. There's always a drama. There's always some big thing going on. It's always an emergency. And after a while, you give up on them, don't you? You're kind of like, I've had all I can take of this person, right? Just being honest here, right? You know, I've given you 400 chances. You're still right back on the drugs. You're still back on the alcohol. You're still here. You're still doing that. And we give up, don't we? Eventually, we give up. We say, well, I'm done. I'm washing my hands. You ever said that? I'm washing my hands of this deal. I'm done. Right? Well, you see, I don't think God ever really wants us to be done. You know? I think God wants our heart to be such that we always have hope for people and we always have love for people. And He never wants us to be done. And I think that was Moses' sin, and probably our sin, probably my sin sometimes, is that sometimes I give up on people. I give up on things. And that's what Moses did. Moses had given up. And God said, that's a sin. You can't make me unholy. I chose this people. This people are my people. You're my leader. Your job is to bring them into the promised land. It's not your job to judge them. It's not your job to condemn them. It's not your job to malign them. Your job is to protect them and to bring them into the land that I promised. And Moses, basically at the Rock of Meribah, he says, I'm done with you people. And God says, Moses, you sinned and you're not going to enter. And the sad part about it is that Moses pleads with God, doesn't he? Let me enter. Let me go across. And all the things Moses had did, all the things he did from God, and everything he put up with for all those years. And God says, no, you're not going to cross over because of what you did at Meribah. You know? So it's really a big thing, isn't it? And I think sometimes we misunderstand it. But I hope maybe it makes you think about this a little bit deeper. The pattern changed. God tested Moses. Moses always stood up. Moses always did the right thing. And the one time God said, Moses, it's easy. Just give them the water. Moses says, no, I'm not. I'm done. I'm going to speak up. I'm going to say my piece. I've had it with this people. And God says, well, Moses, if you've had it with my people, I guess I'm done with you. How sad is that, right? If there's any way that we can help you this evening, won't you let it be known while we stand and sing?